Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
Let's dig into your brain about more serious things. Let's talk about hormones. Everyone is always paranoid that my hormones are not correct and I can't make any progress and whatever. But what does come to your mind when someone starts speaking about that? When someone kind of brings up like, "Hey, Scott, you know what? I think my estrogen is preventing me to lose body fat or whatever." So what's happening there? What do you think, and what are the hormones that are important to know about when it comes to improving someone's aesthetics, physique, well-being?
Um, I've gotten to the point now over the last few years that when somebody uh, comes to me with that as their whatever opening pitch, I'm very hesitant to even consider it, consider them as a client, not for any reason other than the fact that the amount of conversations and explanations I need to do to break some of that thought is exhausting because I've had to do it so many times. It's to the point now where I'm in a couple of these female HRT groups and I'll see that comment come on often, multiple times per day. And I used to respond and then just get into wars on these groups. And now I just read the question and I literally the thought of it is just overwhelming. Like, oh my God, like I don't even want to get into this. Um, to be fair, the importance of hormones is, they're crucial, but they're more about quality of life. They're not offering a whole lot of acute effects. So oftentimes when I'm hearing this, like I can't get results because of my hormones, my hormones, my hormones. I've never seen that be the case ever to this day. I've seen their hormones being slightly out of balance for, whatever reason, some sort of low caloric intake for too long, or maybe some androgenic introduced steroids that's causing menorrhea or something like that. But it's never stopped progress. It just changes what we're looking at and it adds a lot of variables. Um, but it really is contextual. It's a lot to break through though. If somebody believes that they're not making progress because they're estrogen dominant or whatever terminology they're using, it's oftentimes a nightmare to try to show them
Do
otherwise.
you want to break it down? Because the big one is usually for women, estrogen and progesterone. So what are they? What do they do?
So they're the main hormones in female reproduction, but they're the same hormones that you and I have as well. We all share the same hormones. We just have them in different quantities. Estrogen is largely the predominant hormone in the follicular phase of menstrual cycle. So the first 14 days of menstrual cycle is the follicular phase, and that's where estrogen is predominant. And then the last half of the phase is where progesterone is the dominant sex hormone. And they offer different physiological effects, but they're largely there for the sole purpose of reproduction. That's why, as females get into that perimenopausal state where things are a little bit more volatile and possibly the menstrual cycle is intermittent or irregular, it's because the the hormones are volatile. There's peaking and peaks and troughs. It's common terminology. They're just basically starting to run out. You're running out of these hormones because you're going to enter into menopause, and then theoretically at menopause, the thought of reproduction isn't a thing anymore. The body's winding down in life because reproduction at that age is not necessarily um, impossible or wrong, but from an evolutionary standpoint, it's time to possibly shut that factory down. So those hormones are becoming less and less, and that's just the nature of aging. And now with HRT, they're trying to prolong certain things, and it's not that they're trying to prolong the ability of reproduction, because I don't really think we can that well with females, at least with men we can, but not with women. But they are still prolonging quality of life, which I think is important. but it is opening up a can of worms when it comes to how to do it, when to do it, how much, how to apply it, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, well, what are people missing? Because just looking at two hormones to me personally makes no goddamn sense. I just looked today, somebody sent me an email, some kind of company, oh, it's men's wellness month or whatever. Check your testosterone. And I'm like, what is that going to tell me?
Yeah.
Like it means absolutely nothing if it's high or low. It just if because I need to know what's causing that. So what are we missing when we are speaking about women? What other hormones are actually more important? Well, not even more important, but they all need to be in a sync, so to speak. Uh, what are the things that you would like women to check, maybe regularly, to know they are functioning right?
I think I like to keep things as simple as possible for as long as possible with everybody. Even the highest level of athletes, we try to keep it simple because that's always been the answer. So with females, if they're theoretically in the age or the spectrum of age of healthy reproduction years, so they're not in menopause and they're not, a fucking child, their cycle is a very good indication of how things are when it comes to those sex hormones. If they have a regular menstrual cycle, they almost certainly are not dealing with any sort of major concerns at all. Um, so I don't necessarily think you need to pull blood to check that very frequently. I mean, if you're using any sort of exogenous hormone, that changes it. But if you're not, and your menstrual cycle is normal, I wouldn't be looking at that unless there was an obvious symptom that really points to the fact that maybe something is, a bit out of whack. But that's just never the case. So instead of that, I think that they should be looking more at their iron panel because of a regular menstrual cycle um, causes the loss of blood once a month. That's important to look at to make sure that we're not dealing with any sort of anemic issues because that's very, very important for performance. And I would also check thyroid panel because females are notoriously dieting, as in eating in an energy deficit, and that can put some suppressive effect on the thyroid. So those two panels I think are very relevant to be checking, and there's nothing really concrete that you can see in life that could indicate something going wrong there. It's not like your menstrual cycle, well, you missed it, or it's late 6 days this month, or it didn't show up at all. Like those things are kind of obvious to notice. Where things like low iron or thyroid being out of whack, that shares symptoms with other things. So it's hard to just say, oh yeah, you got low iron because you're tired. Well, everybody claims they're tired these days, so it's hard to say. So I think a panel to check that would be good. But honestly, if and like I say, unless you have a very obvious symptom, I think just checking regular blood work is enough. Because if there is something wrong, even in regular blood work, which you should be checking no matter what, at least once a year, twice, I think is good unless you're a drug user. Um, it's going to show up there. The problem is now with uh, all these places and providers and facilities that are offering you blood work. We can check your blood. We can check your blood. Like you can go online and choose 50 different blood providers to give you blood tests. Like, and I have some clients that use multiple different ones and they'll get multiple different readings. Like we've just caused uh, such an issue with variables that it's very difficult to say. And I don't put a ton of value in the lab values anyway. I think it has to be within reason. I'm much more concerned with what are you feeling, and I don't mean like emotionally. I mean like what are you noticing? Like if your symptoms are there, I would sooner chase a symptom than a lab value. But there's a threshold for me, and I see this coming up a lot with females in the HRT stuff. They're constantly chasing libido, so everyone's advising them to take testosterone. I am not a big fan of taking testosterone or administering testosterone to females. It's very rare they're actually hypogonadal, where they're actually therapeutically low and they need a therapeutic dose of testosterone. I have not seen that very often at all. So I'm not a big fan of that, but it does drive libido. No question about it to a degree. But I'm seeing females saying, my libido is still not great. And we're like, well, what's your testosterone level? Well, it's at, 150 nanograms per deciliter. Well, never in your whole life has it been over 70. And now you've got it doubled and you still don't have libido and you still want more. Like at some point, you have to say, come on, we have to look at something else here. And they don't want to accept that. They
Like a new
want
boyfriend,
testosterone. What's that?
like a new boyfriend, probably.
Well, I mean, the harsh truth is a lot of times that is a big factor in what's going on with libido. Men too, it's a psychological aspect, and it's just that something in your dynamic of the relationship isn't there. You can probably drug it because I've worked with some adult film stars, and we can drug the libido, but you're drugging the libido. So like you're going to get some symptoms that you might not want from the elevation of levels that you're getting from huge drug use to drive libido. And the women that are doing this for libido in the groups are going to get the same thing. It's going to take a little time, but it'll come. Like that 5 o'clock shadow will show up one day.
Yeah, I find they improve their libido when they start looking, well, let me rephrase that, when they get stronger. Not when they start looking better, but when they get stronger, like physically more confident in a gym. It's like, it blows my mind every single time. Like, I want to look a certain way. I'm like, this is not healthy. Let's go a little bit through strength phase. And at the end of strength phase, they just walk different. And I changed
Yeah.
that up completely.
Yeah, it does, and it's because that's actually spiking endogenous hormonal production a little bit just by the increased link contractile tissue. All these things. I mean, it's funny because literally, I did a course on strength training for the elderly years ago, and there was three doctors that put this course on, and literally, strength training in a bottle, if could be done, was like the ultimate drug. Like if we could just give you some strength training in a bottle and you could take this, the amount of benefits it offers blows everything out of the water. And yet it's just not being explained or taught properly. Like women are now more than ever strength training, in their mind, which is great, but what they're doing is not really strength training. They're in the weight room, they're lifting weights, but they're not necessarily increasing strength. They're just doing
Mm.
whatever trendy thing they're seeing on social media with bands and body weight exercise and stuff. And that's just not the same thing. You're going to get minimal results from that. If you've never lifted before, sure, you'll get something. But any of these girls that are like, looking to look like their IG superheroes on social media and stuff like that, they're not getting that from bands and body weight. They're getting that from drugs and or actual progressive overload strength training.
Yeah. And I believe the women that do seriously train, they just don't have time to make any content about it.
Right. Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
also very true.
I'm too tired. I'm gonna go home and eat.
Yeah, yes, and that's the answer. I train so hard now. I want to just go eat and relax, and voila, the adaptation starts, and that's exactly what we want you to do. But that's just not the trend.
So you talked about like doing blood test, full blood test, maybe very rarely, and we both know it's just a snapshot of the stuff as well. So if you don't standardize a procedure, what time of the day you take it, what kind of food you eat, how much sleep you had,
Yep.
how close it was to your last training session, and so on and so on and so on, results get quite skewed up. And now we have also a supplement overdrive. Like I
Oh,
always, when I consult anyone, I'm like, dude, you book consultation, but let's talk about these things 8 weeks from now because I want you to just drop every single supplement so we actually understand what's happening in your body because otherwise you're just masking everything. Uh, but talk me through some things that I still see. Obsession of different style of training and nutrition in different phases of menstrual cycle. How relevant is it? What's happening there? And can someone have extra benefit by doing different things based on their cycle?
yes, and that to me and to my knowledge stems from Lyle McDonald's work. And to me, he is the most important person in exercise physiology and exercise science. And his work is the best. And that's actually going to come right out of this book, which I am into this book all the time. I would say it matters, but it matters for a very small percentage of women. And it usually only becomes relevant when they've taken care of the basics first. And that's normally never the case. But Lyle's book is accurate. His work is correct. But that's very, very specific. And like I say, it'll work for sure. I have done it with a few of my clients, but when I say a few, I mean like a handful over years, because the amount of work, it's not that it's hard, it's just that much more. And most of the time they can get benefits without having to worry about that yet. Um, but if they're willing, I would start with it right off the bat because it just makes physiological sense. And it's largely just based on the follicular and luteal phases and the elevation of estrogen in follicular and progesterone in luteal because of its effects on the body's physiology, like insulin resistance and recovery, etc. And it is physiologically true. So it depends on who wants to put in that additional effort to literally go from a higher carbohydrate diet in the follicular phase to a lower carbohydrate diet in the luteal phase because of progesterone increasing insulin resistance, etc. But it's still very real. But then when you get into the other problem with this is when you get into the social media aspect of stuff and the people that are looking a certain way, they take a drug. And as soon as you're taking a drug, all this stuff just becomes, I don't want to say irrelevant, but I mean, a 5 milligram tablet of whatever blows all of that out of the water by a ton. So it's just one of those things where if I was working with a client that literally we needed to get to that next level and the foundation is there, it's accurate, and we're a natural athlete, I would absolutely incorporate some of that stuff where you're trying to time a certain type of training and a certain caloric intake and a certain macronutrient distribution based on the phase of the menstrual cycle. But we're talking about trying to get squeeze the last couple percent out of somebody's abilities. Because if you're doing all that, but your caloric intake is wrong from the beginning, that's not going to help. Like we have to make sure the basics are there first. And that's still to this day, even at high level athletes, and I'm talking at world class athletes, even recently, again, I'm seeing the energy intake still wildly wrong. Of all the things, that's got to be number one. And yet that is being missed still to this day. So until you have that in check, I think everything else just takes the back seat because if you're trying to lose body fat, but you're eating too much, doesn't matter how you distribute your macronutrients or when you distribute them. If you're eating too much, you're eating too much. Or if you're eating too little and you're trying to get stronger or build muscle and you just don't have enough raw material, doesn't matter how you distribute your food. If there isn't enough food, there's no growth. So I do think that, like I said, what his stuff is very accurate and very true. But I think it's got a small demo, from my experience anyway, there's a small demographic of people that benefit from it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about athletes because when I was working in university, they picked up the brightest kids to kind of work with professional athletes, and I was lucky enough to be on the group. And they are the easiest to work because their nutrition is so fucking appalling.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell them to eat peanut butter sandwich on a game day, and they're like, "Wow, I feel like 100% recovered." You're like, "You had a sandwich, dude,"
Yeah,
instead of
right.
buying
Right.
crisps.
It's interesting because the more I work with high level athletes, the more you realize like their genetic potential or their
They're
genetic gift,
freaks. They're freaks.
that was everything. And you spend your whole life comparing yourself to like, why is that guy 500 meters ahead of me on the track? We're the same, everything. I'm like, I mean, look at the difference in your levers and your shape. Like you'll never be faster than this guy or stronger than that guy or taller than that guy. Um,
Yeah.
and it's hard. You go through phase if you're competitive. You go through phase of like beating yourself up. Like, wow, this I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Like you didn't stand a chance. If somebody's 6'8", and you're 6 foot and you're both volleyball players, I mean, there's a good chance you don't stand a chance.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because that's the comparisons that people still have, especially women. Like, I want to be like this and I
Yeah.
want to be like that. It's almost impossible because you don't know what's happening behind closed doors. Even though there's
Yep.
Matthew Said did a lot of good research on like geniuses, how like mentally advanced people can get, and he was like, none of them get born, but they get trained to be like that. But you need to be in a specific environment for that to happen.
Right. Yep.
You know, you
Yep.
can't just pick up a book and read about it. You need to be surrounded by people who are nurturing you into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the body has to adapt. We've talked about this before. The body adapts to the environment. It doesn't have to be a physical only. It's the environment at whole that every little thing has some impact, and your body's adapting to become more efficient in that environment. And so that's absolutely true. And you see the same thing with like I had a bikini competitor just compete 2 weeks ago. She got second. I actually thought she was going to win the overall, and she ended up placing second. And she looked fantastic. But you look at some of the people, and when she, and this happens with clients when they don't win the overall, they start to compare, compare, compare. And I understand why, but sometimes you're comparing things that you can't do anything about. If
Yeah.
somebody has a genetic waste that I can clasp my fingers around, you can't train that. You either have that or you don't. And the way you've been raised, the type of activities you've done your entire life, that has a big influence on what your body's adapted to. And some of those things aren't going back. If you spent a lot of time as a kid playing a lot of sports where you need to take in a lot of energy or a lot of oxygen, a lot of inhale, exhale, your rib cage has adapted to this expanding lungs constantly, 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 and it literally morphologically changes you to a degree. So sometimes the girls that are very, very driven by aesthetics, they're comparing themselves to somebody that they see on social media, assuming the picture hasn't been filtered and fucking edited to death. Sometimes they're comparing themselves to something that you just cannot do. You're not. That's just not. You didn't have those parents, so you don't get those origins and insertions of muscles. You don't get those whatever fucking bone circumferences, etc. Like that's just the genetic component. And if you look at the top level sports, and I'm seeing this now in a wide variety of different sports, genetics is the top, and then drug use is second. So if you've got good genetics and good drug use, you are the goat. If you have shitty genetics, you'll require a lot more drugs. If you have excellent genetics, you might not need many drugs, if any at all, depending on your sport. But I've also noticed that the further up the athleticism ladder we go, the lower the intellect seems to be in a lot of these sports. So, and it sounds, maybe it sounds rude, Reagan, I don't know, but I mean, it's a thing. And when I'm talking to some of these players on like, in the majors or in the NFL, I'm like, the conversations are like, oh my goodness. And you see it on TV, like they're getting tutors because they have to get certain grades to be able to get their scholarship and stuff. It's not a, it's not because they're not trying. It's just that a lot of their God's gift were given to athleticism, and that's it. And everything else requires the work. And most of us are the opposite. We have to work harder at the athletic part of it, where they have to work harder at the intellectual part of it. So it's very fascinating. You don't get it all. You get certain things, and you have to aspire for the other.
Let's pull you back in the estrogen and progesterone because I want to talk about like PMS and early signs. What's the difference when someone has already developed all that and what's happening there?
Well, PMS is the late luteal phase. So that's typically when females are going to get their symptoms of water retention, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when progesterone and estrogen are really taking that final dive before the follicular phase starts. So before the day one of menses. Day one of menses is considered the follicular phase, the beginning of the follicular phase. Um, there are some females that suffer from PMS symptoms that are quite debilitating. I've had the few females where they'll be bedridden for a day, maybe two. And there's some of them have a disorder with that, and then some of them it's just I think some of them are being a bit dramatic. I think some of them are legitimate. It depends, but that's a very normal menstrual cycle, and I think that that's just part of understanding how it impacts you. And if you are a performance athlete or trying to be, it might require you to pay attention to when are you scheduling your events, if possible, to not put them in a in a phase where you might be debilitated from menstrual pain. Um, and then what was the other part of your question?
Another one, I want to pull you more into women who are like in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who are getting into perimenopause and all that
Oh,
kind of stuff. So what what is happening in the body and what women can expect or should expect that might be affecting their body to how it responds to nutrition and training differently as opposed to their early 20s?
from my experiences, that perimenopausal phase is one of the more challenging ones because the hormonal environment is more volatile. So, like the female menstrual cycle during the healthy reproductive years it's cyclical in nature, but it's a repetitive cycle. So, if you have PMS symptoms, you're going to have those PMS symptoms pretty much every single time you're going through that PMS phase. But when you get into that perimenopausal, um, I guess, phase of life, and that differs from age from females, and God knows why. That's an environmental thing, a genetic thing, a predisposition thing. But what happens is those phases of the cycle become more volatile. There's more spikes and dips of these hormones. The luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are usually starting to climb up because they're kind of like the stimulating hormone that says, "Hey, body, make more progesterone," or "Hey, ovaries, make more estrogen." Like, and so you'll see those levels going up because the body's not producing enough progesterone and estrogen. And trying to discover that, in an ideal world, you'd sit in a laboratory for years and let them check your bloods constantly every day so you can see. But what you're not, and instead what you're seeing is women will go in to get the blood checked one random day, and they'll see these levels and they'll make a decision on that, and then they'll go check it again and they'll see wildly different numbers and they'll make a decision on that. And all the while you can't do that because there's nothing regulating these hormones at that point. They are volatile. I have a female right now going through it. She's 50, and she's in the perimenopausal state. So now what we're doing, and this is at the discretion of her doctor. He wants to put an IUD in to give a local progesterone effect only. And he wants to give her an estradiol cream and a testosterone cream all at the same time. I am not a fan of that. I think
I was
that,
about to say it sounds like an experiment.
yeah, and I think this whole HRT thing for women, this is just an experiment. People want to think that there's science behind this. There's science behind hormones. There's science behind steroid use. There's science behind a lot of things, but this is just an ongoing experiment. And women are furious that they're not giving them testosterone. They're not giving them these things. Well, what doctor would willingly give you an androgen at male levels?
Yeah.
They wouldn't. Unethical. And they're furious because they feel so much better on it. Well, of course you do. But in 5 years, you might not like what you see. And they're not trying to, keep you from feeling good. But there's just things we don't know. I have this ongoing, I don't want to call it a debate, but discussion going with Broderick, actually, because we find this both fascinating. Um, Females have spent their whole life in a cyclical hormonal environment, other than the first, say, 10 years of life and then the menopausal phase of life. So for the majority of their life, they're in a cyclical environment. And now we want to put them on HRT where they have steady levels. And they're not doing that until after their reproductive years. So they've spent, say, 50 years in a cyclical hormonal environment. And now we're going to put them in a static hormonal environment. Their entire body has adapted to a cyclical environment forever. And now it's going to be in a static. What is that going to do? We don't know. We can only speculate. So it's hard to say, but when you get that perimenopausal phase, instead of it being cyclical or static, it's volatile. It's all over the place. So it's very difficult to know what's going on. So from my experience, it just requires a lot of patience And what I suggest my clients do is work on one thing at a time. And I'm a big fan of, if possible, first of all, you have to figure out the symptom. Like I have this one client, like her joints are very achy, her recovery isn't great, and her last two blood checks have shown that her estradiol is low. To me, it's an obvious culprit, but the doctors are like, well, I think there might be a virus, there might be a virus, there might be a virus. I don't know, but to me, I would go with the obvious thing. And then if that's the case, and the symptoms are showing low estrogen, for example, and low and the blood levels sort of show the same thing, I would take an oral estrogen, and I would see after a week, you're going to notice, is it causing an improvement or not? If it is, then we're in the right direction. And then I would check bloods again. And I would try to check bloods. I know it's a pain in the ass, at least in Canada and the UK. In the States, it's seemingly easy. But I'd be checking bloods as often as you can to make sure that when you are feeling a certain thing, you can correlate it to a lab value so you can start to narrow this down, because the perimenopausal phase is just, it's just volatile. So you have to try to control as many variables as you can until you get a handle on what's going on, and then you can start to control it.
And would you make any adjustments to training and nutrition?
The nutrition, always, yes. Training, I would base the training adjustments on what they're doing in terms of feedback. Like if they're progressing in the training, I wouldn't touch it. But if they're not, like if, say we are going into these phase of low hormones and not recovering, I would adjust the training for sure, because we can't just drive their bodies into the ground. It's just going to make the hormonal environment that much more problematic to determine.
And what would be the changes you would look into fixing, adjusting in nutrition?
Um, First and foremost, always to me, is the energy balance.
Yeah.
That's the home run. If the energy balance is skewed, everything else is gonna just be a fucking problem.
So does it change massively on menopause?
No, it doesn't. It changes minimally based on body composition. In menopause or in perimenopause, what happens is the hormonal shift, is fat distribution changes, but your ability to burn or oxidize fat versus store doesn't really change a whole lot. But where it's storing the fat changes, and that's something that gets people like, oh, I'm gaining fat in my midsection, something's wrong. Well, you probably were gaining fat all along, but you weren't noticing it in your ass. You're noticing it in your midsection, and that's because of the hormonal shift, and that's because your energy balance was wrong from day one. If the energy balance is wrong, you'll have a hell of a time trying to figure out what to do, because you have nothing to base your progress on.
Mm. Yeah, because that's something you hear a lot. It's like, oh, I'm in menopause, so everything is 10 times harder. But in reality, it's
No.
probably it was exactly the same. You just didn't notice it because your body was reacting to it differently.
Yep.
So
Your metabolism has not really changed because you went into menopause, unless something in your physiology has caused your thyroid to become suppressed for some degree. But even in the worst medical case of hypothyroidism, the BMR was affected by like less than 10%. Like you're not talking, I can eat 3,000 calories, now I can only eat 500. Like it doesn't work that way. If you could eat 3,000 calories, now you can eat 2,700. Like nobody is gaining body fat because of hypothyroidism that wasn't gaining body fat all along. Like it's pretty rare.
yeah, yeah. Appreciate your time, Scott. I know you need to run off, and we'll dig deeper in next videos.
Yeah, sounds good. Anytime.